Welcome to quiz time. It's time to take a delightful stroll down memory lane and put your knowledge to the test with 90 fun-filled questions, from classic movies and golden oldies to historical moments. This trivia is designed to spark memories and smiles. So let's begin. Which 1940s film noir featured a private detective investigating the theft of a jewel-encrusted falcon statue? Laura, Dublin Indemnity, or the Maltese Falcon? The Maltese Falcon. What was the code name for the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943? Operation Husky, Operation Torch, or Operation Anvil? Operation Husky. Which actress won an Academy Award for her role in the 1944 film Gaslight? Bette Davis, Katharine Hepburn, or Ingrid Bergman? Ingrid Bergman. What was the name of the first commercially successful television set introduced by RCA in 1946? Predicta, Philco Tandem, or RCA Victor? RCA Victor. Which wartime agency was responsible for controlling prices and rationing during World War II? War Production Board, Office of Price Administration, or War Manpower Commission? Office of Price Administration. What significant labor law passed by President Truman's veto restricted union activities in 1947? Wagner Act, Taft-Hartley Act, or Landrum-Griffin Act? Taft-Hartley Act. Which iconic automobile was designed by Preston Tucker and featured innovative safety designs in 1948? Tucker 48, Studebaker Champion, or Kaiser Special? Tucker 48. What military decoration was established by George Washington in 1782 and is considered America's first military decoration? The Medal of Honor, Silver Heart, or Purple Heart? Or Silver Star, excuse me. The Purple Heart. Which radio program featuring Detective Dick Tracy introduced the famous theme, "She was only a bird in a gilded cage"? The Shadow, Dragnet, or Dick Tracy? Dick Tracy. What was the original name of the organization that would become the CIA when established in 1947? Office of Strategic Services, Central Intelligence Group, or Foreign Intelligence Service? Central Intelligence Group. Which groundbreaking novel by Richard Wright, published in 1940, tells the story of Bigger Thomas? Invisible Man, The Outsider, or Native Son? Native Son. What was the first successful civilian helicopter designed by Igor Sikorsky and first flown in 1942? Bell 47, Sikorsky R4, or Kaman K225? Sikorsky R4. Which actress was known as the First Lady of the American Screen and starred in films from the 1910s through the 1960s? Mary Pickford, Lillian Gish, or Bette Davis? Bette Davis. What was the name of the Special Force unit trained to disrupt German nuclear research during World War II? The Monuments Men, Operation Paperclip, or the Alsos Mission? The Alsos Mission. Which American author published For Whom the Bell Tolls in 1940? John Steinbeck, William Faulkner, or Ernest Hemingway? Ernest Hemingway. What was the popular radio quiz show hosted by Ralph Edwards where contestants were asked challenging and often embarrassing questions? Truth or Consequences, Information Please, or Quiz Kids? Truth or Consequences? Which 1940s singer was known as The Voice and caused mass hysteria among female fans? Bing Crosby, Perry Como, or Frank Sinatra? Frank Sinatra. What was the first mass-produced computer created by J. Presper Eckert and John Mauchly in 1946? UNIVAC, EDVAC, or ENIAC? The ENIAC. Which experimental aircraft broke the sound barrier in 1947? Bell X-1, Lockheed P-80, or North American F-86? Bell X-1. What significant medical advance discovered by John Enders, Thomas Weller, and Frederick Robbins in 1949 led to the development of the polio vaccine? Iron lung therapy, growth of poliovirus in tissue culture, or Sister Kenny method? Growth of poliovirus in tissue culture. Which 1940s movie featured the character Sam Spade, played by Humphrey Bogart? The Big Sleep, The Maltese Falcon, or Key Largo? The Maltese Falcon. What was the name of the dance craze that originated in Harlem ballrooms in the early 1940s? The Lindy Hop, the Jive, or the Boogie Woogie? The Lindy Hop. Which politician delivered the famous Iron Curtain speech in Fulton, Missouri in 1946? Harry Truman, Winston Churchill, or Joseph Stalin? Winston Churchill. What new synthetic fabric introduced by DuPont in 1938 became widely used during the 1940s? Polyester, rayon, or nylon? Nylon. Which comedian was known for his radio character, the Mean Whittle Kid, in the 1940s? Red Skelton, Fred Allen, or Bob Hope? Red Skelton. What was the first antibiotic to be mass-produced, becoming widely available during World War II? Tetracycline, sulfa drugs, or penicillin? Penicillin. Which historical event is sometimes called the Forgotten War because it occurred between World War II and Vietnam? The Korean War, the Bay of Pigs invasion, or the Greek Civil War? The Korean War. What famous mime artist developed his signature character, Bip the Clown, in the 1940s? Marcel Marceau, Jacques Tati, or Charlie Chaplin? Marcel Marceau. Which Major League Baseball player was the first to hit 60 home runs in a single season? Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, or Ted Williams? Babe Ruth. What was the name of the famous Harlem nightclub where many jazz legends performed in the 1930s and 40s? Cotton Club, Savoy Ballroom, or Apollo Theater? The Cotton Club. Which aircraft manufacturer produced the B-29 Superfortress bomber used in World War II? Lockheed, Douglas, or Boeing? Boeing. What 1940s film noir featured the character of private detective Philip Marlowe, created by Raymond Chandler? The Big Sleep, Murder My Sweet, or Out of the Past? The Big Sleep. Which technological advancement, first demonstrated in December 1947 at Bell Labs, revolutionized electronics? Vacuum tube, transistor, or integrated circuit? Transistor. What was the first commercially successful instant coffee introduced by Nestle in 1938? Maxwell House, Chase and Sanborn, or Nescafé? Nescafé. Which famous musician was known as the King of Swing during the big band era? Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman, or Tommy Dorsey? Benny Goodman. What was the first commercially successful electronic flash for photography that was introduced in 1946? Kodak Ectolite, General Electric Mazda, or Strobonar? Strobonar. Which female pilot set multiple aviation records in the 1930s before disappearing in the Pacific in 1937? Jacqueline Cochran, Amelia Earhart, or Beryl Markham? Amelia Earhart. What 1940s Broadway musical featured the songs There Is Nothing Like a Dame and Some Enchanted Evening? Oklahoma, Carousel, or South Pacific? South Pacific. Which U.S. naval base was attacked on December 7, 1941, bringing America into World War II? Subic Bay, Pearl Harbor, or San Diego Naval Base? Pearl Harbor. What was the name of the first nuclear submarine launched in 1954? USS Nautilus, USS Enterprise, or USS Skate? USS Nautilus. Which acclaimed film director made Citizen Kane as his first feature film in 1941? Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, or Orson Welles? Orson Welles. What was the first successful credit card introduced by Diners Club in 1950? The Diners Club Card, the American Express, or Carte Blanche? The Diners Club Card. Which jazz musician pioneered bebop in the 1940s and played the alto saxophone? Charlie Parker, John Coltrane, or Miles Davis? Charlie Parker. What was the name of the secret U.S. program that brought German scientists to America after World War II? Operation Paperclip, Project Venona, or Operation Overcast? Operation Paperclip. Which 1940s film starred James Stewart as George Bailey, a man who gets to see what life would be like if he had never been born? The Bishop's Wife, Miracle on 34th Street, or It's a Wonderful Life? It's a Wonderful Life. What was the name of the first shopping center built in a suburban area, opened in 1947 in Los Angeles? Northgate Mall, Roosevelt Field, or Broadway Crenshaw Center? Broadway Crenshaw Center. Which artist pioneered the drip painting technique in the late 1940s? Mark Rothko, William de Kooning, or Jackson Pollock? Jackson Pollock. What was the name of the classified U.S. government research project to develop nuclear weapons during World War II? Manhattan Project, Trinity Project, or Project Alberta? Manhattan Project. Which famous American photographer was known for his images of the Great Depression and worked for the Farm Security Administration? Walker Evans, Ansel Adams, or Alfred Stieglitz? Walker Evans. What was the first successful commercial airliner with a pressurized cabin introduced in 1949? Douglas DC-6, Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, or the de Havilland Comet? Boeing 377 Stratocruiser. Which actor played Rick Blaine in the 1942 film Casablanca? Cary Grant, Clark Gable, or Humphrey Bogart? Humphrey Bogart. What medical innovation introduced in the 1940s revolutionized the treatment of psychiatric disorders? Lobotomy, chlorprozamine, or lithium therapy? Lithium therapy. Which mathematical theory developed by John von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern in 1944 changed economics and military strategy? Chaos theory, game theory, or systems theory? Game theory. What was the name of the specially modified B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima? Enola Gay, Boxcar, or Memphis Belle? Enola Gay. Which radio program featured the memorable line, "Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows." The Inner Sanctum, Suspense, or The Shadow? The Shadow. What was the first successful computer programming language developed by Grace Hopper in the late 1940s? Fortran, Flowmatic, or COBOL? Flowmatic. Which acclaimed dancer and choreographer founded the New York City Ballet in 1948? Jerome Robbins, Martha Graham, or George Balanchine? George Balanchine. What was the first television network to broadcast in color? ABC, CBS, or NBC? CBS. Which pilot broke the sound barrier in the Bell X-1 aircraft in 1947? Jimmy Doolittle, Chuck Yeager, or John Glenn? Chuck Yeager. What was the nickname of the B-17 Flying Fortress that completed 25 missions over Europe during World War II? Memphis Belle, Lucky Lady, or Sally B? Memphis Belle. Which American author wrote The Grapes of Wrath, published in 1939? William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, or John Steinbeck? John Steinbeck. What famous department store's annual event was featured in the 1947 film Miracle on 34th Street? Bloomingdale's, Macy's, or Gimbel's? Macy's. Which famous cartoonist created the character of Bugs Bunny, who first appeared in his definitive form in 1940? Chuck Jones, Tex Avery, or Walt Disney? Tex Avery. What was the first commercially successful portable radio introduced by Zenith in 1942? Regency TR-1, Emerson 520, or Zenith Transoceanic? Zenith Transoceanic. Which female swimmer won 3 gold medals at the 1948 London Olympics? Esther Williams, Ann Curtis, or Greta Anderson? Greta Anderson. What was the name of the first international organization dedicated to maintaining world peace, established after World War I? The League of Nations, United Nations, or World Peace Council? League of Nations. Which famous architect designed Fallingwater, a house built over a waterfall in Pennsylvania? Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, or Le Corbusier? Frank Lloyd Wright. What was the first electronic digital computer built at Iowa State University between 1937 and 1942? ENIAC, Colossus, or Antonoff-Berry computer? The Antonoff-Berry computer. Which blues musician recorded Maybelline in 1955, considered one of the first rock and roll records? Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, or Bo Diddley? Chuck Berry. What was the name of the economic assistance program initiated by the United States to help rebuild Western Europe after World War II? The Marshall Plan, Lend-Lease Program, or Point 4 Program? The Marshall Plan. Which playwright wrote Death of a Salesman, which premiered on Broadway in 1949? Eugene O'Neill, Tennessee Williams, or Arthur Miller? Arthur Miller. What was the first antibiotic to be isolated from a soil bacterium discovered by Selman Waxman in 1943? Penicillin, streptomycin, or tetracycline? Streptomycin. Which famous photographer was known for his stark portraits and landscape photographs of the American West? Alfred Stieglitz, Edward Weston, or Ansel Adams? Ansel Adams. What was the first commercially successful home air conditioner introduced by Carrier in 1928? Weathermaker, Frigidaire, or Coolair? Weathermaker. Which famous conductor founded the NBC Symphony Orchestra in 1937? Leonard Bernstein, Arturo Toscanini, or Herbert von Karajan? Arturo Toscanini. What was the first synthetic detergent introduced by Procter & Gamble in 1946? Tide, Cheer, or Oxidol? Tide. Which famous dance duo performed in movies like Flying Down to Rio and Top Hat in the 1930s? Gene Kelly and Sid Charisse, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, or Bill Robinson and Shirley Temple? Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. What was the first commercially successful instant camera introduced by Polaroid in 1948? SX70, Model 95, or One Step? Model 95. Which African-American baseball player broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947? Willie Mays, Jackie Robinson, or Larry Doby? Jackie Robinson. What was the first commercially successful ballpoint pen marketed as the Biro in Europe and the Reynolds Rocket in the US? Parker 51, Waterman Tape-Write, or Biro? Biro. What was the name of the American B-29 bomber that dropped the atomic bomb on Nagasaki in 1945? Enola Gay, Boxcar, or The Great Artiste? Boxcar. Which famous children's book author wrote Horton Hears a Who in 1954? E.B. White, Dr. Seuss, or Roald Dahl? Dr. Seuss. What was the first successful antipsychotic medication introduced in 1952? Thorazine, Haldol, or Risperdal? Thorazine. Which female tennis player won 10 Grand Slam singles titles between 1946 and 1956? Maureen Conley, Margaret Court, or Louise Brough? Louise Brough. Which famous anthropologist published Coming of Age in Samoa in 1928? Margaret Mead, Franz Boas, or Claude Levi-Strauss? Margaret Mead. What was the name of the treaty that officially ended World War I? Treaty of Paris, Treaty of Versailles, or Treaty of Trianon? Treaty of Versailles. Which children's television show featuring puppets aimed at preschoolers, which debuted in 1947. Howdy Doody, Kukla Fren and Ollie, or Romper Room? Kukla, Fran, and Ollie. What was the first commercially successful videotape recorder introduced by Ampex in 1956? Quadruplex, helical scan, or U-matic? Quadruplex. Which American general led the Allied forces in Europe during World War II and later became president? George Patton, Douglas MacArthur, or Dwight D. Eisenhower? Dwight D. Eisenhower. Which jazz musician was known as the Prez and was a leading tenor saxophonist in the 1930s and 40s? Coleman Hawkins, Lester Young, or Sonny Rollins? Lester Young. Thanks for playing this quiz. Please share your score in the comments. We'd love to know how you did, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.